Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Paddy in the studio.
And it's Laura in the studio. And Henry is having a week off. So we are graced with the journalist of the moment.
Hello.
Who are you?
Oh, who am I? Nick Watt. How's that?
Marvellous. Nick Watt, the political editor of Newsnight, who's making some news of your own this week. Since we last spoke, Paddy, yesterday, we just broke the news that Lee Anderson, the Tory MP, had been booted out of the party for making what a lot of people believe were racist and unpleasant Islamic comments. And there's been a statement from Anderson himself, and also overnight a statement from the Prime Minister too, condemning extremism and anti-Semitism, but not condemning Islamophobia. Should we remind ourselves what Lee Anderson actually said before we get into all the furore about it?
I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan, and they've got control of London, and they've got control of Storm as well.
So this came up on both programmes. Now, in a moment, I'll bring to the table the fierce criticism of those remarks from Sir Robert Buckland, who is the former Lord Chancellor and the former Justice Secretary and a trained lawyer, who says those comments are racist.
He said that plainly, didn't he?
He said that, and I'll bring you that. But you had Oliver Dowden attempting to answer the same question, but not. Indeed.
Let's have a listen.
The chance that it could be taken, the fact that it could be taken in that way is the reason why those comments led to the Chief Whip asking for an apology from the Prime Minister. I share those concerns about how they could be taken in that way, and that's why it was right he should be asked for an apology. When he failed to give that apology, the whip was removed.
I think our viewers will hear very clearly, though, you are declining to give your own view on what those words mean, words matter.
I think I've been clear that they could be taken that way, right? And because they could be taken that way, he was given the chance to apologise, and he failed to do so, and the whip was removed.
If he'd apologised, would he have kept his job?
Yes, he was asked to apologise. He failed to do so, and that's what flowed from it.
Now, it's fair to tell people who weren't watching this morning, newscasters, that was also after several attempts to get Oliver Dowden to clarify what his own view was on those comments. Nick, without us then parsing what the comments really meant, it's very clear that a lot of people think they were Islamophobic and racist. From a political point of view, what is going on here?
What is going on here is Oliver Dowden obviously wanted to make clear to you that he stands by the decision to take the Conservative whip off Lee Anderson, but it appears to be for the very limited reason that he was asked to apologise and effectively retract those remarks, and he didn't. And obviously you questioned Oliver Dowden at some length, and specifically on that question, do you believe, how would you characterise these remarks? Would you personally like to distance yourself from these remarks? And Oliver Dowden says these remarks can and indeed have caused offence. Have they caused offence to you, Oliver Dowden? Obviously, he didn't go down that road. And he was talking about how, in general, Lee Anderson was raising an important point, and this is in the context of the Speaker appearing to change the rules because there were fears for the safety of Labour MPs. And it was interesting, he was also asked about a separate piece in the Sunday Telegraph by Suella Braverman when she talked about how they, in the context of Islamists, have basically taken over the Labour Party, talked about how they were taking over the country. And he declined to say that they were seen as remarks that are clearly over the line.
And before we get into this anymore, it is also just worth saying it is a bizarre phenomenon that we are seeing of late, where you have Conservative politicians pointing at other people and saying other people, whoever they are somehow in charge, when actually they have been the government and in charge of the establishment and politics in this country for 14 years. However, Paddy, Dowden's remarks were a complete contrast to what Robert Buckland said to you.
Yes, I think what we're saying to newscasters is that Sunday is a sliding doors moment in broadcasting. So here's Sir Robert Buckland.
His comment about the Mayor of London being controlled by Islamists is, I'm afraid, racist. It crosses a line. It was repugnant. It actually detracted from a legitimate debate about elements of extremism, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's extreme pro-Islamism, whether it's far-right extremism, that, aided by the megaphone of social media, seem to be increasingly proliferating in public life here in the UK.
What is tricky, I think, for the Conservatives here as well, not just about these individual remarks and the obvious disagreement inside the Conservative Party over how these kinds of remarks should be interpreted, is that there is, in some people's views, a track record here. So you have the prominent Muslim peer Sadiq Khan, who has been on social media this morning after our programme saying that Oliver Dowden was mealy-mouthed, he was evasive. There's the fact that the Prime Minister put out this statement and didn't talk about Islamophobia as well. As Robert Buckland was saying there is a really important debate about how we manage this extremism, how we protect the safety of MPs, how you make sure that we can have a proper debate and discussion safely about what's going on here. But it does seem like time and again the Conservatives keep tripping up on this particular issue.
Well, there is a very strong feeling across the Conservative Party that there is a problem with fundamentalism in this country. There is a problem with seeing those pro-Palestinian marches that take place on a Saturday in London, where the vast majority of people are just there, motivated by feeling passionately that what is happening in Gaza is terribly, terribly wrong. But you do see anti-Semitic tropes. You do see anti-Semitic language, and the criticism is that the police aren't doing enough about that. And there is a very strong feeling in the Conservative Party and indeed in the Labour Party that there is a serious issue here. What has happened here is that Lee Anderson and Suella Braverman are using language which, to put it politely, is outside the political mainstream. 10 or 15 years ago, you couldn't imagine anybody in any of the mainstream parties using this sort of language. And what you have with Oliver Dowden is somebody saying, making clear, well, I wouldn't use that language, but they're not coming out and absolutely condemning it. And he's not condemning it because he believes there is a wider issue, but also not wholly condemning it because they're clearly worried about somebody like Lee Anderson. They're worried about the following that he has. They've sort of made him up to be the sort of the poster boy of the Red Wall MPs, and they're worried about sort of pushing him too far.
Yeah, because what Suella Braverman said was, the truth is that the Islamists, the extremists and the anti-Semites are in charge now. So I said to Robert Buckland, I thought the Prime Minister was in charge, because clearly there's an issue of if Rishi Sunak is controlling his MPs. To your point about they want Lee Anderson to be Lee Anderson, but they've got to know when to stop him being Lee Anderson. If they can't turn off Liz Truss, they can't turn off Suella Braverman, and they can't turn off Lee Anderson, then it's not the question of who's in charge also applies to the whip.
To the backbenchers.
And to the backbenchers of the Conservative Party.
Well, and Laura asked Oliver Dowden about that appearance by Liz Truss at that CPAC conference where Steve Bannon talked about how Tommy Robinson was a hero, and Liz Truss didn't call him out, and Oliver Dowden said,
nodded.
Well, it's quite difficult when you're on a stage, you sometimes can't hear this. Well, Steve Bannon is going to say that sort of thing. That is what he's going to say. But I thought Andy Burnham made a really interesting point to Laura when you mentioned that Suella Braverman article. They've taken control of this. They've taken control of that. Andy Burnham says, can you imagine if somebody had written that about Jewish people? That would rightly have been condemned by everybody as anti-Semitism, and yet Suella Braverman says that about Islamists, and Oliver Dowden doesn't call that out.
So back to my theme about sliding doors. Let's listen to both together. Oliver Dowden on Laura Kuenssberg and Sir Robert Buckland on Radio 4.
Well, I would say in respect of what Suella said is that I disagree with what she said here, but I think that's in a different category, which is about, I disagree with the comments. By the way, I believe for the reasons that I set out, the underlying sentiment of my deep concern about this, these threats and these intimidations, which are often coming from Islamic extremists, and we shouldn't be shy of calling that out, and I have done so as a member of Parliament. But I don't believe that what Suella has said crosses the line in the way that Lee Anderson's.
But why not?
Do.
Because she said the Islamists are in charge. Now, you've said you don't believe that's true. Lee Anderson said the Islamists are in control of Sadiq Khan. Why is it different?
Well, I think there's a slight danger of getting into semantics of this, but I think this is...
But words matter. You've said that yourself.
Laura, if you please allow me to finish my point. That this is about attaching specifically to one person, the Mayor of London. I think what Suella was saying was making a broader statement, one which I don't agree with the specifics of what she said, but I do very much agree with the concerns that she is raising about threats coming often from Islamic extremists.
Whilst it's legitimate to talk about ugly elements of extremism in this country. It is wrong to conflate whole groups of people, whether based on faith or ethnicity, with extremists. To conflate Islamism and Islam and Muslim people is just wrong. It doesn't accord with the traditions of, I think, my party, or indeed the general run of British public life. We can talk frankly about issues like Rochdale and Rotherham and be honest and follow the evidence irrespective of ethnicity and prosecute people regardless of where they're from or what their cultural background might be, because abuse is abuse. But to go beyond that and to start to conflate issues is dangerous. If it's being done deliberately, then it is absolutely unacceptable.
This is messy, isn't it? I think this is very messy, and I think that today's tensions and obvious disagreements inside the Conservative Party on this are going to carry on being a story for at least the next couple of days, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, it gets to a fundamental point that I think you were making, Laura, or one of your guests was making. I think one of your guests was making, perhaps it was Andy Burnham, that many people in the Conservative Party believe they have lost the next election, and that the debate at the moment is what happens after the election. And we all remember what happened in 1997 when the Conservatives lost, and in 2010 when Labour lost. Both parties, it was in 1997 we lost because we weren't Conservative enough. Mm-hmm. In 2010, Labour lost because they weren't Labour enough. So the assumption is that the debate will be is we lost because we weren't Conservative enough. So Liz Truss, Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, they want to be right at the front of that debate saying, well, I was Conservative enough, I'm the serious candidate, look at me. And that is essentially the parameters.
And I told you so at the time. I was trying to say these things and I was getting shut down by the terrible wets who didn't let me say what I really think. Yeah. And it is also worth saying, I think, and we know this from our inbox, both from you newscasters and also on the Sunday shows, there are lots of people and there is a lot of genuine concern out there that actually things have been allowed to fester in a way. We had the counter-extremism czar on the programme last week, and he was very calmly expressing a concern that some communities have been allowed to live parallel lives, and that has allowed some views to fester, which many people might find difficult in a modern United Kingdom.
Yes.
Now, obviously, I'm not espousing any of that. Newscasters, you all know at the BBC, we don't have views. We're not espousing any ideologies. But it is also the case that there is a concern among some people maybe listening today, or some people who watch our programmes, and some people in political parties, that some kinds of behaviours have been allowed to proliferate in ways that ought not to have been.
Yeah, and this is the front page of the Sunday Telegraph today, yes, which says that this is a generational radicalisation moment, that the war in the Middle East is a flex point in British society, and it's stressing multiculturalism, and we know it's stressing the constitution, the unwritten constitutional rules of the House of Commons, because this particular row in the Conservative Party about Lee Anderson follows the explosive events in the Commons, of which Nick Watt was a witness plus, I would argue. So we will hear in our next section with Nick the truth about what went on with that tweet.
Newscast from the BBC.
OK, so we were talking yesterday about the fiasco on Wednesday night, and Lisa Nandy, who was speaking for the Labour Party this morning, said explicitly in terms, she gave us a specific guarantee that no Labour MP, no Labour staff, it's interesting that she actually went that far, had anything to do with any threats that might have been made to Lindsay Hoyle that led him to choose to allow a vote on Labour's plan that avoided embarrassing them with a rebellion, allowed Keir Starmer to win the politics of the day over the SNP. But Nick, that is not what you reported. So are you tearing up the pages in your notebook, or was Lisa Nandy telling a different story?
No, not at all. Well, look, I know Lisa Nandy very well. It's a bit difficult to work for the Guardian newspaper for 18 years and not know lots of people in the Labour Party very well.
This is you. It's your career you're talking about.
Yeah, but Lisa Nandy, I know her very well. I mean, you know, you work for The Guardian for that long, you get to know lots of people in the Labour Party. And I know two big things about Lisa Nandy. One is she's a woman of enormous integrity. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is she's incredibly clever. And because Lisa Nandy is incredibly clever, you have to look at every single word she says very carefully. Mm-hmm. So your first question to her, you said, can you guarantee that no one in the Labour Party was involved in a conversation about the Speaker's future jobs prospects? And Lisa Nandy says, yes, I believe I can. And she said, I've had numerous conversations with Keir Starmer, with the Chief Whip, with David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary. And the idea that this sort of thing would be done is for the birds. But then you asked her a second question.
Rather than making a political point, I just want then to highlight to viewers that you have then just given us a specific assurance on the record that no one in the Labour Party said or communicated a message to Lindsay Hoyle that his job might be on the line if he did not allow Labour to have a vote on its amendment, its plan in the House of Commons.
Well, look, I certainly didn't, the Chief Whip didn't, the leader of the Labour Party didn't, no members of staff were involved, it would ever be involved in doing something like that. And frankly, if anybody had done something like that from any political party, I think they would have had very short thrift from the Speaker.
So Lisa Nandy was asked by Laura about this. And as I said, Lisa Nandy, very serious politician, very clever, take her incredibly serious. Can you guarantee that nobody in Labour was involved in conversations about the Speaker's job? And as you heard, first answer was, yes, I believe I can, and talked about the numerous conversations she'd had with Keir Starmer, the Chief Whip, and then with David Lammy. The second question, as you heard, you then said, can you, Lisa Nandy, give a specific assurance that no one in Labour communicated a message to the Speaker? And at this point, her second answer is slightly different. She says, well, I certainly didn't. The Chief Whip didn't, Keir Starmer didn't, and no member of staff would have been involved. They were given short shrift. So you obviously, when you have a story like I did, as you know, Laura, you don't name your sources, but also crucially, you don't say who your sources weren't.
Correct.
Because then it's a... But what I can say is that my reporting is entirely consistent with that second answer from Lisa Nandy. Because the crucial point about this was reporting over a period of about 48 to 72 hours, talking to numerous people. And the point about the Speaker is that he has sort of formal meetings. He would meet the chief whips of the various parties. He'd meet somebody like David Lammy. Perhaps we know that he met Keir Starmer. But he also had lots and lots of other meetings, some formal, some informal.
Some with the clerks present, some with the clerks not present.
And the point about Lindsay Hoyle is it's not so much he has an open door policy. He has a anyone can talk to me at any moment of the day policy. He's incredibly open. He is as happy to talk to the Prime Minister as he is to talk to the cleaner.
Or his parrot.
Or his parrot. And lots and lots and lots of people talking to him.
Can I, though, for newscasters, ask you to explain how both of those things can be true without revealing your sources, without saying what you were told? How is it possible that a senior figure in the political establishment can receive communications if we also have a senior politician saying on the record there weren't communications, nobody did it, no members of staff would have tried, Keir Starmer didn't, David Lammy didn't, the Chief Whip didn't. So what are we talking about here? Smoke signals? You send a pigeon in with a message, somebody will be written in the sky above the Thames saying, allow our amendment or you're toast, Sir Lindsay. What kind of thing might you be talking about in as much as you can tell us? And I know it's important to protect your sources.
What I reported was that senior Labour sources had passed on these messages. I didn't say who they were because you don't name your sources. Lisa Nandy has given quite a specific cast list. And the cast list is the leader of the Labour Party.
Not him.
The Chief Whip.
Not him.
The Shadow Foreign Secretary.
Not him.
And a member of the Labour Party staff.
Not them.
Right. My reporting is consistent with that. So I'm not going to get into who I did or I didn't quote, who I did or I didn't quote. But I was talking to lots and lots of people. And the point that I was making to Nick Robinson on the Today programme the other day is I am the journalist who is at Westminster later than anyone else, and you have conversations. And the point about these conversations is these aren't necessarily briefings.
No.
These are sort of chats.
Yes.
These are people often bearing their soul.
Yes.
These are people telling you what they think, saying, what do you think of this? You're having very open and very honest conversations. And obviously you have absolutely got to protect the identity of those people. And in those circumstances, because it's not like a briefing, it's not like even a background briefing, it's chats.
And you're putting together
this stuff up.
And you are putting together a jigsaw for the audience.
Yeah, and
you're making me miss being in Westminster.
Yeah, and you can only report it if it's more than one person, and you can only report it if they are incredibly serious people, because there's a massive responsibility on somebody like me to be accurate, but to offer a judgment around credibility. And that was what I was doing.
Can I ask one more question? You may not feel that you can answer this. When you had these conversations around this, was there an element of bragging rights? Because Labour beat the SNP at the politics on Wednesday. It was a horrible scene, but Labour beat the SNP at the political game that they'd been trying to play. So was it your sense that people were telling you to now allow you to put together this jigsaw by saying, yeah, we pulled one over on it. Well, we got Lindsay, managed to get Lindsay in line.
This is another thing that's been misunderstood about my reporting, because I obviously tweeted this after Lindsay Hoyle had made his decision around about 2 or 3 o'clock on the Wednesday afternoon. People assumed that I'd been given a briefing and it was the Labour Party bragging, and off it went. You can't get into too much detail of when and where you spoke to people, because then you could potentially do jigsaw identification. But what I was saying is this was reporting that took place over a 48-hour to 72-hour period.
To you both, there's more treacherous waters for the Speaker, because if the SNP want a meaningful vote this week on a Gaza ceasefire, that takes me back as a general journalist. That phrase is the Bercow era, which got him into hot water with Theresa May. Apparently they're less amendable, the meaningful votes. I mean, he's not out of the choppy waters, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, if he calls a meaningful vote or if he doesn't.
No, and I think that there's sort of universal agreement across Westminster that this week looked dreadful. You know, we know from our inboxes actually that people were sort of appalled by a lot of what they saw. But the reason, newscasters, while we are talking about all of this, what sounds like very arcane detail, is that what happened in Parliament this week and how it descended into an ugly, ugly pantomime is extremely important. It talks to the independence of the referee, the Speaker of the House of Commons. It talks to what politicians were willing to do on a debate of that nature, which is about life and limb and horror unfolding in the Middle East. And there is, of course, I feel a very uncomfortable sort of mismatch between our politicians' behaviour this week and the sort of reality of what's happening on the ground in Gaza. But newscasters, please forgive us, because it is extremely important, because the independence of the chair in the House of Commons, who the ref is, really, really matters, and how our political parties are grappling with these really hard, emotive issues around what's going on in the Middle East, extremism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. It's really important.
I mean, it is an unedifying spectacle that you have this horrible, horrible conflict in the Middle East, and Parliament seems to be tying itself up in knots about ancient procedures. But it is worth explaining the fundamental point of what the Speaker was trying to do, is that he was worried that had he done nothing, there would have only been two options to vote for. The SNP motion, which was unacceptable to many people in the Labour Party because it did not condemn the Hamas attack of the 7th of October, and it accused Israel of being guilty of collective punishment, which Labour believes is accusing them of breaching international law. And those Labour MPs couldn't vote for the government one because it only talked about humanitarian pauses. And he believed that it was important to give Labour MPs the chance to vote for a humanitarian, an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, to vote for that in a way they felt comfortable, to avoid the spectacle of last November when they had to vote for the SNP to be able to vote for an immediate ceasefire. That looked difficult. He admits it was a mistake, but he was just trying to give the three main parties a chance for something they felt comfortable they could vote for on an incredibly divisive issue.
I think what you've done, the two of you, is lifted the lid on what it's like reporting on Westminster, and that newscasters like us when we go, when we reveal what we do. And I would just like to end by saying, on last Sunday's newscast, we were wrong. We did not in any way predict a cataclysmic week.
No, we didn't. And we thought it would be all right.
Well, newscasters like it when we own up to our mistakes, which is kind of what Lindsay Hoyle is saying. I do feel it's the end.
I do feel it's the end. And actually, it's a shame, because I was going to mention a little mini scoopette yesterday that people... I was shown a load of text messages that were sent among Conservatives warning them not to give Lee Anderson a job in 2018. But that's a whole other story that we didn't have time for.
Well, we don't have time either for Robert Buckland's final remark to me that people who have views that are outside the Conservative Party should leave the Conservative Party. That was his final word.
Goodness me, we should all leave though, really.
I'm desperate to leave.
Newscasters, don't leave us. We always want you to be with us. Thank you for listening to this Sunday's newscast. Nick Watt, Newsnight's political editor, thank you for standing in for Henry. It was excellent to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
Adam will be here tomorrow, I think.
Yes.
Adam will be here tomorrow. Lovely. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Newscast from the BBC.